Transmission of nerve impulses. Earlier, we have learned conduction of nerve impulses. So, difference between conduction and the word transmission is like this. Transmission is the movement or how the impulses pass from one neuron to another through the junctions called synapses. Now, this is one neuron where there are dendrites here, cell body, and then comes the axon terminal, synaptic knob, and then the next neuron. So transmission is when the impulses flows through one neuron in the electrical form, that is through transmission of ions, sodium potassium channels here. So when the electrical impulses passes along the axon, then we should call it as conduction. Then these impulses will reach the axon terminal. As they reach the axon terminal, they get converted to the neurotransmitters. In the gaps between the neurons, these junctions or the gaps are called as synapse. They are called as synapse. So transmission is when the nerve impulses passes from one neuron to the next. That is transmission. Whereas conduction means when the impulses passes along the axon. Now there are two types of synapses. Synapse need not be always having gaps. So synapses can be of two types. One is electrical type. Electrical type of synapse means the neurons are not separated by any gaps. They are tightly bound. The dendrites as well as the axon terminal will be tightly bound with each other. Like this. Here in this case, the synapse will not have any gaps between. The membranes of the pre as well as postsynaptic neurons are very close to each other. No gaps are present between the neurons. So the electric current can flow directly from one neuron into the other. Instead of using neurotransmitters, they can directly pass on from one neuron to another without the presence of the neurotransmitters. Here in this case, the first neuron is called presynaptic neuron. The neuron to which the electric current is passed is called as postsynaptic neuron. This is presynaptic neuron and this is postsynaptic neuron. So this is a synapse called as electrical synapse. In this synapse, the membranes of pre as well as postsynaptic neuron, they are so close to each other that there is no gap present. In this case, the electric current can flow directly from one neuron into the other. Now, this kind of neurons are actually rare, and if they are there, they are found in the hypothalamus of brain and the retina of eyes. The transmission of nerve impulses will be fast in this case because there is no need for the neurotransmitters to get activated here. The next type of neuron or next type of synapse is called as chemical synapse. In chemical synapse, there is a gap between two neurons. Now this is the axon terminal. This neuron is called as presynaptic neuron. And the next neuron second neuron is called postsynaptic neuron. At the end of the axon terminal, we have the synaptic knobs. So the electrical impulses that comes from the cell body and passes through the axon, finally they reach the synaptic knob where they will be converted into chemical impulses in vesicles. These chemical impulses will have neurotransmitters. And this synapse area has got gap. So neurotransmitters will be released into the gaps between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron. These will be received by receptors. They will be received by the receptors that are present on the membrane of postsynaptic neuron. And then this will help in the conduction of nerve impulses in the postsynaptic neuron. The ion channels will open, the sodium potassium pump will start getting activated. So conduction nerve impulses will follow after that, leading to action potential of the postsynaptic neuron. So in this case, there is a gap present between the two neurons, presynaptic and postsynaptic neuron. So this kind of synapse is called as chemical synapse. So chemical synapse means the membranes of pre and postsynaptic neurons are separated by a space called synaptic cleft. So when an impulse arrives at the axon terminal vesicles carrying the neurotransmitters, they move towards a membrane and they release them into the gap, that is synaptic cleft. So that's what we see here. This gap is called synaptic cleft into which the neurotransmitters are released. These neurotransmitters bind with the receptors. Receptors are cells that receives the neurotransmitters. Bind with the receptors present on the postsynaptic neuron, and then they will open the ion channels and help in generating action potential in it. So these are the two types of synapses. The first one, in which synaptic cleft is not present, is called as electrical synapse, and second one is called as chemical synapse.